because while I know China very well personally and see no threat from China and no risk from China, people who don't know China well imagine all sorts of things. And also in Washington, people who are more interested in power than in well-being think that it's very important to be number one. This is not very interesting in my view. What I think is interesting is well-being, harmony, cooperation, and peace. That I see no intrinsic obstacle to achieving.
But the issue is not just in Washington. What we see right now, according to poll, more and more Americans have less and less positive views towards China. And to be honest, like China, they doesn't build like 300 military bases around the United States. They don't send out troops to patrol the West. And why the public opinions are getting less and less positive?
Well, the public opinion is very much swayed by the official propaganda. And the U.S. official propaganda is that China is a threat. In fact, we even hear people talking openly about war with China within the next few years. Of course, I think that this is grotesquely irresponsible. There is no cause of war at all. This kind of talk should be absolutely not undertaken by responsible officials. But this is what the public hears. So I don't think that the public's view is formed by their own personal knowledge. Most Americans, unfortunately, have not had a chance to visit China or know people in China personally. And so what they believe is what they hear from their government. And the propaganda from the U.S. government has been pretty relentless in the last 10 years. This is very unfortunate and very irresponsible and very dangerous, I can add. But in the end, American foreign policy is made by a relatively small group. It's not made by public opinion. It is driven by strategists in the security apparatus, the intelligence agencies, the Pentagon, the White House, the National Security Council. These people ought to know better. And this is what I keep saying. They are being absolutely irresponsible in their approach, and we need a different approach in the United States.
Can we get different approach, even if the election result were to be Donald Trump or Kamala Harris? Can we get a different China policy?
Well, on the one hand, it's quite clear that American foreign policy is failing everywhere. Even the meeting in the BRICS in Kazan is a demonstration of failure. If you look at the 36 governments that were around the table in Kazan, they represent 57% of the world population. And in addition to those 36, there are dozens more that are very sympathetic. The large majority of the world does not believe that it is in the Western camp. If anything, it believes that it is in the group of countries seeking economic and sustainable development. It doesn't want to be in anybody's camp. It wants to have peace, security, and economic advancement. That's the main goal in most places in the world. The U.S. foreign policy is based on the idea of hegemony, that the U.S. must be the dominant power in every region of the world. But if you aim for that, you're bound to be in conflict with other powerful countries. And so the very definition of U.S. foreign policy puts us on a path of conflict. Now, can this change? Yes, because what is happening is not working. So any new group should absolutely analyze why is it that most of the world does not subscribe to the U.S. version of events? Why is it that most of the world is not together with the United States, for example, regarding the wars in Ukraine and in the Middle East. I hope that American analysts and strategists understand that they are failing in their foreign policy. Of course, I've been saying this for many years. So far, it hasn't changed much, except it has raised actually the escalation. And I can say that in the most recent issue of Foreign Affairs magazine, which is the magazine of the Council on Foreign Relations, and not a bad indicator of where the foreign policy establishment is, the issue is about war. It's not about peace. It's not about a new foreign policy. It's mainly about war. And this is terribly dangerous and terribly wrong-headed. So I'm hoping that friends of the United States will also tell the U.S. that the current approach is far too dangerous. It's far too unproductive. It is, if anything, pushing countries into open opposition to the United States, and that bullying and making demands will not work. It won't work against China. It won't work against Russia. It won't work against even small countries now, which have choices. So this is my hope. It's not a high probability, frankly, of a quick change, but it's not impossible. If you analyze the situation rationally and carefully, you come to the conclusion that a very different foreign policy is needed. I think, if I may say one more point, our current foreign policy was set in place pretty much in the 1990s by Zbigniew Brzezinski and others. And Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote in 1997 in a book called The Grand Chessboard that Russia, China, and Iran would not form an alliance. But of course, they have. Contrary to what Brzezinski said, this is a demonstration of the failure of the ideas that were put in place in the 1990s, because what Brzezinski said was we could bully Russia and they would have no alternative but to fall into line with the United States. But we bullied and bullied and bullied, and Russia said, you know what, we don't want to be bullied this way. And that is really a big part of the explanation of why events have gone the way they've gone.
And how do you see the differences of Donald Trump and Kamala Harris' China policy?
Well, they're both on the campaign trail expressing anti-China views. This is the pseudo-wisdom or the irresponsibility of political advisors who say to both of them, campaign against China, that will be good for the votes in Pennsylvania or in Michigan or in Illinois, Ohio, the so-called swing states in the American Midwest. But this is a game. This is not really an expression of deep thought. This is a political game designed by political advisors, not a reflection of true interests in the world, true good sense, and so on. So there's not a lot of difference between the two. Of course, Donald Trump is, in some sense, less predictable, but Kamala Harris is predictable and anti-China, and so that's not a very good predictability. So I wouldn't say that there's a marked difference between the two. The same goes with their Middle East policy. They both basically campaign to say who is more in love with Israel and Israel's wars. It's terrible because it's, again, a terrible mistake, a terrible injustice, but also it's driven by domestic political considerations, not good sense, decency, or international law.